3 out of 4 people in this country think that the rate of inflation has gone up in the last year, which is like really troubling.
Metalloid, where do you think the economic anxiety comes from?
So I think the economic anxiety comes from, there's a few places, but the main one I think has come from is what I just mentioned.
There are so many parts. Here's the thing that drives me the craziest, okay? And maybe I'm wrong for thinking about it this way, but there are so many individual parts about the Donald Trump story that if any of them had applied to a Democrat, I think Republicans would have taken up arms. Okay, should we believe Americans when they say the economy is bad? Okay, we paid $600 for this article. Let's read it, finally.
Christian filled me in on what you guys are working on. So you're putting together a house in Ohio?
Canvassing house, yeah. Where basically it's like bringing... Sejin, why don't you talk through it?
Yeah, no, he filled me in.
Oh. Well, so what, are you just fucking quizzing me? Yeah, we're gonna have canvassers there, working on canvassing operations, like a more permanent kind of like establishment, and then hopefully we'll bring in a bunch of other people to do like one of our big like door knocking events, and yeah.
That's really exciting.
Wow, for Thompson, thanks for the $49.99. I love it.
Good stuff in Georgia in 2020. Did you do it in 2022 as well?
Yes, we did, right, Christian? Yeah, we did 2 in Georgia and then 1 in Omaha, yes.
Yeah, we did 2 special elections, both in Georgia, yeah.
That's dope.
Yeah. Well, how's life been with you? How have you been doing?
Life's good. COD just came out, so I've just been playing a bunch of that and covering a little bit of politics.
What is that? What COD are we up to now? Is it like Modern Warfare 3 or something? Am I making that up?
It's the second Modern Warfare 3. So they did like a soft reboot in 2019, and so yeah, it's Modern Warfare 3.
Call of Duty, I think, is probably the only gaming franchise, the only gaming related thing that is a more confusing naming scheme than Nintendo, I think. Jesus.
Yeah, it's like the Rambo series.
Does Rambo have a weird naming scheme too?
Yeah, bro. It's the first movie's called First Blood.
Okay.
The second movie is called Rambo First Blood 2, and the third movie is called Rambo 3. But if you were doing it sequentially in the proper way, the third one would have to be First Blood 3 Rambo 2.
I'm gonna go ahead and disagree with you here on this one, Chief. But okay.
I'm just saying.
Yeah. Okay.
I got that from Angry Video Game Nerd. Do you remember him?
I feel like I've watched his videos a bit in the past, but I never fell into that style of content. Like I didn't watch much of that. I don't watch much of anything, I guess, online. So kind of boring there. Yeah.
He was like one of the OGs of content, like really truly one of the OGs. Like he was doing it before YouTube, so yeah. But yeah, definitely, like, I don't know about you, I don't know how consistent you've been over the years, but I would say like over the last few years of covering politics, I've definitely become much more like I just tweeted about it, but I used to think that like misinformation and bullshit was almost exclusively a problem on the right. And I thought that for like probably like a decent chunk of the Trump years. And so now I feel like my positions haven't changed like at all, but I'm just way more wary of shit online from the left space. It doesn't seem very
I feel like
healthy.
This is kind of where I'm at right now, and it feels really shitty, but I'm pretty sure it's the closest position to true that I think I've been at before. I just don't think anybody politically has very many principles. It's more just kind of like whatever works for this particular argument. You've got like a toolbox in front of you, and you pick and choose the tools based on the argument. If you go back from like, I would say maybe 2005 to 2013, the reason why misinformation probably seemed so much bigger on the right than the left is because I think most of the things that the left were arguing for were pretty fact-based. It was hard to make shit up. Like we're talking about things like equal rights for like gay people and marriage. Some talk about like prison reform or immigration reform, something to do with illegal immigrants, things like climate change, pushing for like higher education, like all things that are like pretty good and like easy to back up. And then on the right, they're just kind of like do their wacky like, oh, trickle down econ, like dumb shit like that. Now, in the past, I would have assumed that like, oh, cool. Like, I think the quote we used to say was, reality often has a liberal leaning or a liberal bias. That was like a thing that liberals say. Yeah. And I think that was probably true at that point in time. But now as time has gone on, and now the political narratives on the left have drifted further from reality, rather than what I would hope to see, which is a bunch of people like, whoa, hold on, guys, we're not being very fact-based anymore. Now they're just like, we don't trust science. We don't trust this. We don't trust that. This is probably more blah, blah, blah. And then you find like, oh, so I guess we all just kind of play fast and loose with the facts when they are convenient for us to, which is unfortunate, but yeah.
It's a totally different framework too. Like I've gotten in the habit. I've reviewed a few second thought videos in the last few weeks. Bro,
he is one of the worst content creators on YouTube. I've never seen such a high misinformation per second. Like, oh, sorry.
Oh,
I cut you off. Yeah.
No. It's wild. Like the thing with him though is that he's so confident in his delivery that if you're sort of like a normie or you don't bother to look into things further when people make claims, I could totally understand people sort of taking him at his word. Because he delivers things so authoritatively.
They're just like matter of fact. And then he's got a good narrative to wrap it all up. Many people don't realize that in the 1950s, the CIA was actually torturing and murdering plenty of black people. And this is why today the black people don't support blah, 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 blah. Like it'll say shit like this. And it all sounds like, oh, he reads like a history book. Yeah, but almost every fact he gives is either wrong or wildly distorted. And then the narratives to wrap it all up are insane. Yeah.
You really have to evaluate him line by line. So you got to like pause the video and address each individual sentence that he so flippantly said that the way that Rome dealt with pandemics was basically not too different from what the United States did with COVID.
Okay. I don't even know if that's true or not, but okay.
There's no way they had literally had leper colonies. Like there's just no like the framework was basically like the rich people just let the poor people die while they, accumulate more money. When I'm pretty sure the opposite is what happened in the United States. Like we had this really comparatively generous stimulus program in this country, and the bottom percentiles of income earners saw their wages rise and their like savings rise like during that time. So he could not have been further from the truth. But yeah, there's just a lot of people like him in the space now, and I feel like they just dominate on Twitter.
Horrible. So, also on that thing, to be clear, we were either first or maybe second behind Japan in terms of like per capita aid given anywhere in the world. The United States, we gave an unfucking godly amount of money over COVID. The unemployment insurance, like sometimes you hear things and it's like, oh God, that's just a meme that they blah, blah, blah. I'm pretty sure it was true that there were a decent chunk of people that were making more money on unemployment insurance than they ever made working. Like it was an insane amount of stimulus given out.
No, that's absolutely. It was $600 a week on top of what they were getting with the normal benefits.
It was insane. And then like $2,000 stimulus checks or $1,400, $600. And then the PPP. There was a ton of stimulus being given out.
So this, I don't know, for this cycle, I don't know about you, but I'm really just focused on kind of cutting through all that and ignoring it to the best of my ability, but then calling it out when I feel it's appropriate. Because I feel like the doomer crowd, the crowd that's like, they're piggybacking off of this conflict in Israel, for example, to proudly announce that they're not going to vote for Biden. When really I think that they were just like, they were waiting for something like that to happen the whole time. So they could because they do this every fucking cycle.
Yeah.
And I figured something out, man. I figured out that this is the thing that makes them feel powerful, because their sort of brand of politics has only just gotten more irrelevant as time has gone on. And this is the way that they sort of psych themselves up and feel like they have some control or feel like they have some influence, not just like on social media, but in like the body politic. And if you just ignore that altogether, and like they want you to like beg them for their vote. And this time around, I'm not going to do that anymore. I did that for like in 2020. I was like literally begging people like, please just think about the outcomes. Yeah. And now I'm like, fuck it. Like, fuck you. Don't vote. I don't give a fuck. We'll do it without you. We've been doing it without you for the last like 3 years straight as Democrats have been overperforming the polls and just crushing in elections all over the country. So anyways, yeah, that's my my strategy, my mindset right now.
Yeah. It sucks because like the misinformation high ground was like one of the nicest and most comfortable high grounds that I could occupy. But now it's like very, very, very hard. And I've actually made this complaint for quite a while. But like when I go into conversations with people, I have to differentiate myself from a lot of other people on the left immediately because of the propensity to spread misinformation from like all sides now. Like I have to immediately disown like 6 or 7 crazy leftist talking points in order for the person to know that I'm sane. But then it starts to feel like I'm not even, it feels like I'm gaslighting them almost, where it's like, okay, listen, I'm not like this leftist. Because like if a conservative, when they come up and they talk to me and they're like, okay, well, I don't support Trump, I just want you to know this, like I almost never believe. I'm like, bullshit, you fucking deep throat Trump every day on your fucking Twitter feed. I know you do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it feels weird for me to say like, okay, like I promise I'm not in favor of like trans 4-year-olds, and you know, I don't think that you know, America's the worst fucking person in every single international conflict that I blah blah blah. You know, like yeah, it's hard to. Yeah, I don't want to like rob billionaires of all their money because I think a 100% wealth tax over $1 billion is ethical. Blah, blah. Like, yeah, it's annoying to have to disown so many left-leaning positions, but then say like, yeah, I support Democrats whole and whole, you know, through and through. Yeah, it's annoying.
Isn't there a volume of data at this point that demonstrates that kids as early as 3 can start demonstrating like trans identity stuff?
A volume? Absolutely not. In terms of people at that age having questions about their gender identity or whatever, it's possible, but solid data on people that young? Absolutely not. No shot. From what I've read and seen, you probably will know especially when you start to hit puberty, because that's when the dysphoria it drops hardcore, and that's when you're gonna start feeling bad. But it also depends on what you mean when you say trans, because that definition has changed a lot on the far left too. So,
well, I don't mean like medical interventions or anything like that, but I feel like I'm going to fact check you on this after the fact and then get back to you.
Sure.
Tell you if you're right or wrong. But I feel like I read something about like trans people like demonstrating like an incongruence with their like biological sex and their behavioral as early as 3. I don't know. I'm not saying that that's necessarily like the average starting point, but I feel like maybe what I read was that they can start demonstrating as early as 3.
So this is what I would probably say to this, okay? Or here's what I would say to this, okay? Follow me here, okay? It wouldn't surprise me if 95% of trans people that are trans felt it at age 3. However, 99% of people having trans symptoms at age 3 aren't trans. Does that make sense, what I'm saying there?
You mean that your premise is that they quote unquote like outgrow it or something?
Well, or they just have like random gender identity issues, or they're working on their conforming, their development or whatever, and sometimes you stray or whatever. Like the people that conservatives quote this number incorrectly all the time, but like the number of people that desist, so they have gender dysphoric feelings and then those go away, it's really high. It's like 97%. Now, conservatives will say that number is like, well, this is for people on puberty blockers and treatments and that's not true. That's not what a desister is. Somebody who started treatment and then stopped treatment like that, they'll misquote that number there. But a lot of people that have questions with gender identity shit, it'll subside in time. So that's why I would just say we have to be careful of like identifying like a 3 or 4-year-old as trans and treating them that way, because like we don't. Yeah, that's a kind of wild that people are like. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Are you gonna watch that Daily Wire movie?
Maybe. You know what? I might throw it on. Wait, is it out yet?
I don't know. I think you have to subscribe to like Daily Wire Plus or whatever to watch.
I'll subscribe to it. Listen, guys, if we hit $45,000 on this dono drive tonight for the houses, I'll do on Kick, because I don't think Kick will care, because it's not like a fucking Marvel movie or something. We will watch the entire Daily Wire movie, that new one, on Kick. I'll do it, guys. Okay.
What was that thing that happened between you and DSA in 2020? Because I thought I remember like the online narrative being that you guys like accomplished nothing, and I feel like they were trying to like laugh at you guys for what you were doing.
What was it? I don't even remember. I think it was just like a bunch of people were basically like making fun, like Mike from PA did this, just a bunch of people, because they didn't like me, they were making fun of my community for getting involved in like canvassing and stuff. And then people like the DSA were trying to undermine our efforts. I say trying to undermine, but it was just a bunch of dipshits like tweeting online or whatever, saying that we
they
weren't
called
doing
you
that.
a Nazi, didn't they?
Everybody's calling me a Nazi at this point. Yeah, that's possible. They called
I'm
you a
pretty
Nazi.
sure they said something like, we don't deal with Nazis or whatever.
Yeah, that might have been the case.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, maybe it was the Rittenhouse comments around then. A lot of people consider me a Nazi for that. So
probably,
maybe. Yeah, maybe.
I don't know about you, but I feel like I have been unwaveringly optimistic about 2024. Like there's a lot of doom and gloom.
Yeah.
But I just feel like the Democrats right now, like I'm not going to bet my life that Biden's going to win. I wouldn't take it that far, but I'm just not overly concerned about the polls right now. I just don't think they're any kind of meaningful predictor for what's going to happen. And I think like polls this far out are just sort of like a general vibe check. And I feel like a lot of politics right now is sort of just kind of vibes. The disconnect between the economic data that we're seeing and what the narrative is and like what people actually think is like enormous right now.
I've had so many conversations about this on stream today. I don't know if JSTLK is going to jump in on this one. Economists are like scouring the data to try to figure out like where the is the economic anxiety coming from, because it just doesn't seem to show up in any of the PPP, any of these indexes, inflation, wage growth, home ownership rates.
One interesting metric is the amount of small businesses that are being started. It's skyrocketed. Like we are well above like the amount of new businesses being started, new small businesses being started now is leagues above where we were pre-pandemic. And that's just like, if the economy was really as shitty as people seem to think that it is, then there's just no way that would be happening. And it seems to be a problem that's kind of like limited to America, because I was looking at some sort of chart that popped up on my feed the last couple of days, comparing other countries like France, maybe Germany or something. And it seemed like sort of like the consumer sentiment was right in line with the actual like real, like the expected consumer sentiment was right in line with what you would expect it to be given inflation or whatever in their countries or whatever other markers you're considering. But in the United States, there's this huge disparity, or rather, I don't know if disparity is the word, but yeah, there's a huge like disconnect there. So anyways, getting back to it, I just wonder,
I was going to say too on that, I'm curious for the people's thoughts. I would be curious, I wonder if there's plenty of this, people's thoughts about inflation in every country, because supposedly, I think what I read last was the United States, I think, is leading the OECD in terms of inflation, like right now. Like we're doing better than every other country, I think, in the OECD, or it might have just been the G7. But I wonder if people's feelings in each of those countries reflects that. Or like, is it possible that there are people that are experiencing worse inflations in other countries than the US have better feelings about inflation than the United States? I'd be curious about, that.
Or maybe if we're talking about countries, I mean, which is kind of broadly the case in Europe, that have stronger social safety nets. So even if there is a lot of inflation, there's not as much anxiety because people don't have to worry about like medical bills or, these kinds of things. Like I think it's like 3 out of 4 people in this country think that the rate of inflation has gone up in the last year, which is like really troubling. And if you're Biden, it's like, how do you pierce through that? But he has like the next year, and as long as the economy like keeps doing well, as long as wages keep outpacing inflation as it's been doing for several months now, people are gonna feel that. So like, gas prices are high, and McDonald's costs more than it did a couple years ago, but as long as we keep on this current trend, I feel like it should start to swing in Biden's favor. And then on top of that, I just really I don't understand the unbridled optimism if you're a Trump supporter that he's going to survive like 3 or 4 potentially rapid fire trials, one of them being televised, like right going into the convention. And I feel like it's 100% chance that he's going to be convicted on at least one of those charges. Anyways, are you feeling optimistic about 2024? Where are you at with that?
Am I feeling optimistic? I actually don't know. I don't have a good answer to that. My issue is that if we were to talk, let's say that every American voter's brain was zapped and it came down to like a critical evaluation of the candidates, then it's over. I cannot believe, and I think most honest people have admitted as much, Biden has exceeded every possible expectation in regards to basically every single part of his presidency. Except for, I guess, maybe immigration, we haven't touched at all. But foreign policy wise, I think the Ukraine-Russia stuff and I think the Israel-Palestine stuff, I think he handled about as well as he could have. I'm super happy with all of his handlings there. Domestically, obviously we've got all the major legislation. You've got him he has turned down the temperature dramatically on a lot of the insult-based politics and shit. And despite Republicans trying to say oh, well, look at this one speech 4 years ago where he had the red in the background and he said MAGA Republicans, blah, 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 blah. He's done there's that one fucking speech they go back to a million fucking times, right? I think for the most part, Biden has done a really good job at almost every single aspect of his presidency. So on the facts, because Trumples, even in my chat today, will come and be like, oh, well, Biden is fucking senile. What do you think about that? It's okay, well, a senile old man was literally 50 billion times more effective in office than your, quote unquote, billionaire business leader, right? Trump didn't get shit done on anything. Trump literally he has to run on memes. That's all he can run on. The only thing that Trump can run on is negative American sentiment, that you don't like what's happening right now, because he sure as fuck didn't do anything to help anybody except for tax cuts, which was just, by the way, they're called tax cuts when Republicans do it. It's called deficit spending when Democrats do it, which is bullshit. Okay, and that's exactly what Trump did.
It sunsets in 2025, except for the corporate tax. Tax
so
cut.
fuck that. Yeah, Trump didn't do anything. Even if you like Trump, even if you like what Trump said he was going to do, Trump is not your guy because he did fucking nothing. So yeah, I don't know.
People don't vote for Trump because of policy. Like and his policy prescriptions are fucking insane too. Like when people ask him how he would deal with inflation, what does he always say? Drill, baby, drill. That's his only solution to inflation. It's like, oh, we'll just drill more. Meanwhile, we're manufacturing more domestic, like crude
than
oil
we ever have. And I believe we're drilling domestically more than we ever have as well, I believe, because Biden opened up permits on a ton of federal land too. Like, Trump didn't do this. Trump also talked about passing infrastructure. He didn't do it. Trump also talked about doing things about the border. He didn't do it. Biden has opened up refugee offices in multiple Central American countries. He got $1 billion worth of funding secured from Mexico to help build the wall, which is what Trump did. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, there's no point. Don't even waste my time. Why are you even here, you fucking idiot, talking to me about policy related to Trump?
You didn't hit on China yet.
That's great. Trump has done nothing regarding policy. Don't ever come in here again and talk to me about Trump relating to policy. Hutch, you're wasting our fucking time. No Trump fan gives a fuck about any policy or things. We should just talk about his tweets. That's all they care about. Jesus fuck.
Wait, is this Jay person like a Trump person or?
No, he's like a radical centrist. He's to the right of me, but
gotcha.
he's an okay guy.
Gotcha.
He's a good faith interlocutor. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, in terms of the economic anxiety stuff, a lot of the economic indicators are really positive, but a couple that are not positive are the personal savings rate.
Who cares? I doubt that bullshit. That's not, nobody anywhere in all of social media and all of going on the news is like, yeah, I'm really worried because I haven't saved as much money. Like, I understand that the personal savings is low and has been, by the way, for quite a while.
Not having money in your bank account is a pretty bad thing.
Hold on, wait. Not having money in your bank account is a pretty bad thing? No. Not being able to afford things is a bad thing, which is what low money in your bank account is a proxy for, but it doesn't seem like affordability is an issue right now when you look at things like home ownership rates, when you look at things like inflation, when you look at things like the PPP and the CPI. Yeah.
So the next thing I was going to mention is that personal debt, household spending, and credit card debt are at record highs as well.
Is that adjusted for inflation, or... Because I'm curious, is like credit card debt something that has always been rising over time, or is this something that's like...
see all of these things adjusted for inflation, but I do think it's a fairly generalized narrative at this point that like Americans are doom spending is the term that they're using.
What is doom spending? What does that mean?
Generally like apathy about the economy, so people are like, well, fuck it, I'll just take on debt, and who really cares? People just taking on way more debt than they can reasonably pay back.
Oh, I don't believe that.
Okay, I don't have the graphs on.
No, I mean, like, it might be that Americans are acquiring more credit card debt, but the idea that people are out here consciously spending, thinking like, oh, I don't have to pay this back in 5 years because everything's going to crash, I don't believe that. That sounds like a meme from 4chan.
I mean, I don't know about that everything's going to crash. I think it's just like, yeah, when you're apathetic enough, it's not that it's going to crash, it's just like, fuck it, I don't know, it's not going to matter. But, so those are some indicators, and especially now, I think somebody in my chat was saying this a couple nights ago, but it's the credit card debt is not credit card debt. The student loans are back, right? So a bunch of people are having their student loans snap back on. So that probably explains a lot of the anger here as well. So I think it's really interesting. So one of the things I was thinking about and that I've read about a little bit is that it seems like this is the narrative I think is going to start coming out, is that sellers, people who are like selling anything, widgets, luxury items, they've gotten like infinitely more sophisticated in how they sell products to you. They can sell products to you at a way higher price, or they're basically way better at manipulating. You think of something like Amazon, where they basically have all of the data on you that they could possibly need. They know exactly how to sell you any item that you need, right? So they can sell it to you at the highest price point possible. And buyers, like consumers in the market, haven't increased their sophistication in coordination with the sellers. So we're seeing that like people are just getting sold to at like it's basically the Uber Eats problem that you're talking about, Destiny, but people are like the metaphor I'm trying to use, or I'm trying to work on, is like, imagine if, Amazon or Uber Eats like developed mind control and they could force people to buy shit. It's not quite that bad, obviously, but we're getting to a point where it's like, oh, are people like just actually not able to save themselves from this? Does the government need to step in to slow this down somehow?
This reminds me of the avocado toast argument.
Yeah, like I'm sure this is like a thing, but it's like this sounds like a 1% of the problem or something. Like,
Well, so this is just all in an attempt to find where this economic anxiety is coming from, right?
And you think the economic anxiety is coming from Amazon is too good at selling people products, so they feel bad about it, or?
I'm saying that Biden's camp right now is split on whether they want to come out and say like, hey, you guys need to look at these numbers, the economy isn't that bad, or whether they need to figure out like what exactly is causing this anxiety and like go slow. Because if it comes out and there is some narrative that can be backed up with data that says people are really fucked, then that's going to tank their election, right? So that's the split in his camp right now, is do we come out and tell the American people like, chin up, you need to figure it out, like here's all these numbers, you have a bunch of reasons to be optimistic, or do they keep trying to invest in time like figuring out where that anxiety actually is, if it has an underlying basis in reality?
What exactly are, I mean, I don't know if anybody here is qualified to actually speak to this, but like when we talk about like sort of normie Americans, people that aren't super engaged, and people maybe they're more focused on their community, their family, their church, or whatever, what exactly are the expectations that they have for the president to intervene economically? Like,
people always hold the president accountable.
To,
that's just like a norm, I think, like in all like echelons of like.
But if you ask them like, what do you want Biden to do? What would the answer be?
You're talking policy again. Nobody thinks in that way.
It doesn't matter.
Nobody thinks policy. They just think like lower the things or raise the things. Like Trump maybe that's like, I had so many debates with Trumpers who are like, yeah, Trump gave us a great economy. I'm like, what did Trump do for the economy? And it's like, oh, sometimes they'd say tax cuts, but that's it. Like, yeah.
No, they like to vaguely talk about deregulation, but
yeah, but then you ask like, what's the thing that he deregulated that was like good or beneficial? Yeah, they have no idea.
Will be able to, yeah,
exactly. Metalloid Sword wants to come in here and say something.
Okay, so can you hear me fine?
Unfortunately,
yep.
Yeah. Okay. So just to bring up savings rate. That's actually, so it's really complicated. This is what really annoys you. Cannot like. And you're going to know this as well, but you can't like simplify the economy into a single thing. Like whenever you're talking about unemployment the other day, there's a ton of measures that you have to bring together because these single measures by themselves just aren't good enough. The savings rate is essentially what you get back after like expenses of the, of payment and stuff. But it also, you have to remember this is cumulative and it's not a perfect measure. For example, I just linked something in chat. The excess savings rate isn't something you can perfectly measure, but the excess saving rate is still over 2019 for all income periods. And we can see this through checkable deposits, through like Bank of America does monthly basically consumer checkpoints, and they push out their data that they will give away to investors and stuff like that. To look at what the consumer is doing, and we know for certain that we're nearing like the basically like precipice of like the lowest income brackets being the flat from 2019 COVID to now, because there was a huge checkable deposits increase post the COVID boom. But it's not a problem with like what's his name, spending or savings in that sense. The problem with it is because we had a huge spike in inflation, services inflation, which is basically food, energy, and housing, is basically sticking around 4 to 5%. And that's really important because services is what the actual consumer feels. Like, gas is really important because it has huge implications on inflation and people's like sentiment. There's a thing called, pretty sure it's San Francisco Fed, and they do the inflation sentiment survey, and it's basically been hovering on like 2.5 to 3, I think, which is really important because it gives you an idea of what the people think inflation is going to be.
Okay, hold on, wait. One point. Okay, a couple points at a time instead of rambling off your entire master's thesis. Okay, Gisticle.
What? You want me to respond to that? I'm not even, like, I don't care.
Okay, Metalloid. Okay,
without the narrative is Metalloid that people are at the end of the rope,
gotcha.
And that's what they're feeling.
Okay,
yeah,
Metalloid. Yeah, where do you think the economic anxiety comes from?
So I think the economic anxiety comes from, there's a few places, but the main one I think has come from is what I just mentioned, is these basically services that are flatline inflation at 5%. Like normally we're experiencing for the last 10 years, and even in the 09, it was
hold on. Okay, hold on. You have to bring a billion dates up. Okay.
Sorry, okay.
When you say services flatlined at 5%, you're saying there are certain services that people are accustomed to consuming that are increasing at inflation 5% year over year over year.
Yeah, around 4.5 to 5% is what we're at right now.
Yeah. What services are you referring to specifically? What do you mean?
So if you type in, it's basically, it's CPI minus food, all the volatile aspects, so commodities and housing, because housing is supply driven. So it's basically preordained essentially. And I know that sounds really like weird, but the way that the economists and stuff like that forecast CPI is they can basically see OER, which is owner's equivalent rent, which is what the CPI is 50% of housing. Is how the metric is like is calculated essentially. So a huge portion of CPI is housing. So you take away that, and then you take away food, you take away oil, and then you basically get the core services. You can call it super core, or you can call it core X services, or X housing. The way you can see it,
and those are doing poorly right now, is what you're saying?
No. So core X housing is basically it's flatlining at around 4 to 5%, whereas if you include housing, it's gone from it's like a huge mile down essentially. I can get a chart for you if you want, but I think it's called sticky inflation on Fred. So you can type in sticky inflation Fred, and it should show it. I believe that one's X energy and food. I think it's X housing as well. But that is what I think is important for the consumers, because the higher that stays at around 4 to 5%, you need wages to consistently go above that. For lower income consumers, because you're right, you said before that we did have a huge increase in wages, and the lowest income brackets got the biggest part of it because of
okay, when I look at this historically though, it seems like it's always been pretty fucking high. In some cases it's been really fucking high, and now it's getting kind of high now compared to where it's been, I would say, from the 90s onwards. For sure it's high now. Okay, hold on, never mind. It is definitely elevated now. It needs to come down to what, 2 to 3%, and right now it's sitting at around 5%. Okay.
You have to remember that's really important for the lower than 50 percentile income earners.
Gotcha.
Because
and this is, hold on, which goods and services do these represent?
This will be everything but gas, oil related stuff, housing, and what's the one? Food. That's it. Yeah.
Wait, what else is in there? Sorry.
Oh god, I have to get up the thing. There's a lot of them because they do the measures for CPI.
Okay, because when you say really important, okay, and this is just my experience, and I totally acknowledge maybe in other places we're doing. When I was poor, there were 2 payments that mattered. One was my car, and one was my house, and that was 70 to 80% of all my shit. And then from there, there's other things that I'm paying for, but these were by far my 2 big expenses. So if you remove both of those, I'm just curious, what else makes you feel the pain of anything else.
It's also the case that when they ended the child tax credit, that was a big deal for a lot of families, for millions of families.
Sure.
Okay,
so that was another.
You've got apparel, new vehicles, used cars and trucks, medical care commodities, there's a big one, alcoholic beverages, tobacco smoking, then you missed that one, and then you've got medical services, physician services, hospital services, transportation services. That would be, no, I think that would come under. No, it wouldn't actually. No, that would be under it. So transportation services, motor vehicle insurance, and airfares.
Interesting. Okay. Huh.
And sorry, the sticky line, is that perception or reality?
What do you mean?
Are we talking about consumer sentiment, or are we talking about
Oh, these are well, not reality. They're not perfect measures, but this is the best measure that we can get from the government. It is known as the best measure. I'm not saying it's fake or something, but that's the best. It's called hard data. You've got hard data and soft data. Soft data is surveys, and then hard data is you've gone to a place and you've actually mapped out data and stuff like that. Gotcha.
And wages aren't outpacing even this line here?
No, wages are okay. So you can't look at it So if you go into Atlanta.
Hold on, let me try this and tell me if I explain this correctly. I don't know how to explain things. I don't know if you can look at wages as an entire thing because different people make different amounts of money. One of the things that Metalloid said earlier was that the bottom 50% are affected by this the most, meaning wages as an aggregate might be outgrowing this inflation, but wages in the bottom 50% are not outgrowing this particular sticky CPI. So those people are going to feel the pain of this more than other people, even if wages in the aggregate are outdoing the CPI inflation thing. Is that what you're saying, or?
Kinda, but it wouldn't. It's less so that, and it's more so that the amount that the lower percentile classes would have to earn, wages increasing, would have to be increasing cumulatively for the whole of this year to outpace it. Because right now they've been declining since the beginning of the year. Wage increases year over year. They've been declining since now, and it's almost, I think we're around 4 to 5% right now.
Okay, but if they're not keeping above the sticky CPI, but they are maintaining growth above the flexible CPI, because my understanding is, especially in this labor market, I thought lower people's wage growth has been quite a bit higher than like even other people, that they've been made some of the largest gains. So how are they?
No, they have. Yeah, you're right. No, you're right. Yeah, like for example, there's a lot of there's a huge amount of union wages that are increasing, like the AOW or UAW.
Yep, okay, we don't need to cover that. So then tell me, explain why is their wage not outgrowing, or why?
But if the important thing is, it's not just like we have to look at before 2020 and then the spike, what it did to it, right? Okay. So the before 2019, it was pretty. We were moving up. Inflation was moving up like steadily at very slow pace. But we didn't have very high wage increase for like basically any class. It was kind of stagnant from 2010. It was increasing.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hold on. Sorry. Jesus fucking Christ. Okay. I think I understand what you're saying. Okay. You're using this word cumulative, or maybe I'm retarded. I just figured out. Okay. What you're saying is that this huge spike here, right? Let's say that I do an inflation of 100% for 1 year and wages grow 5% that year. Then let's say for the next 10 years, let's say that inflation grows at 5%, but wages grow at 6%. And then 20 years out, I'm saying like, well, look, wages are outpacing inflation. What's the issue? You would say, well, hold on. We've got to take into account the cumulative effect of the massive 100% spike earlier on. That's what you're saying has to be accounted for. Okay, that makes more sense.
And because we haven't had a huge crash, like you'll notice that most of the this is a very, very, very long cycle. I'm not going to say recession, but like a long cycle period.
Economic contraction, expansion, whatever.
Yeah. We've had 2.5 years of very high like inflation relatively. And you can go back through history, the last 30 years. We haven't had a period like this for a long time. 2008 was very, very quick increase in inflation.
Okay, so here's a question, okay? Because you're saying then that there is some real crunch felt in the lower end of the economy because of the cumulative effects of the inflation. Is there another place where we can see this economic data come out? Maybe it's in people not being able to afford the food they want, reduction in home ownership rates or car purchase rates, or not starting small business. Like, is there some other metric that we can look at that's like a proxy for this kind of spending, or?
The best way that I would look at it would be PCE, would be what's it called? I say personal consumption expenditures. Is you can basically see where money is going. It's essentially a CPI comparative, but you actually see where the money's going to. So this only lets you see where the money's going to each month on month, essentially, and you can track it, but it doesn't show you, because what you're asking for is really hard, because there's ways to gauge it, like the consumer, what they're spending on, but we don't get specific data, but they're of a person's spending, for say. The best way to do it, ironically, is to go through company filings, which I do a lot. I can tell you that there is in no sense of the word is spending down. What's happened is volume has contracted around 2.3 to 2 to 3%. Volume of total items sold. So you might sell 100 sneakers, then 99 sneakers.
Okay.
But the nominal amount of GDP is still the same, but the GDP nominally is extremely high this year, but that can be extremely counterweight to what the reality is of what the consumers
I understand what you're saying. So I might be able to say, well, last year Americans spent $100 on shoes, and this year they spent $110 on shoes. So clearly everything is better for everybody. But what you're saying is, well, last year $100 bought 2 pairs of shoes. This year one pair of shoes costs $110. Okay, so looking at just the raw amount spent is not enough to be reflective of maybe.
Yeah, because nominal spending is all it will show you is how good the economy's doing on a asset level.
Gotcha.
That doesn't matter for consumers.
Okay, I understand. Who are purchasing discrete objects or things like that.
Yeah, because they care what the price tag is. Yeah,
I understand. Okay, interesting. All right. Okay. Anything else, or can I expel you?
If you really quickly, Metaloid, do you think credit card defaults sort of?
Oh, that was another thing. Yeah, credit card data. That is huge misnomer.
Okay. Somebody in chat asked, so I figured I'd ask you.
I'll be quick. The credit card data, essentially, what everyone brings up, the 20 billion mark, or whatever the fuck, that's a snapshot, okay? It's not concurrent data or concurrent revolving debt, okay? So what it means is is it takes a snapshot of the current amount of credit card debt held by people, which could be in what's his name, when you go into default, whatever the fuck. It could be recurring interest, or it could not. Like, they could, most likely what happens is as the economy goes up nominally in GDP, credit card debt is always going to go up, because that's just how it works. The economy is expanding, so credit is being issued, the same as debt in all places. Okay, so that's not a good way to measure. Credit card debt will always follow after anything else. It is not like a measure of anything like bad in the economy. The only times it ever matters is if you had a huge credit boom, like in '08, where everything's driven on a huge amount of credit given out by the banks and stuff like that, and they don't have they're not in a good position to keep that reliable credit at bay, so the consumers can actually pay it back. But because we're not in a credit cycle, we're in a income cycle where incomes rise, and that makes inflation go up. That's different than a credit cycle. They're two different, very different economic situations.
Gotcha.
Interesting.
I can send some charts of credit card payments and stuff like that in chat, and I'll leave now. So, yeah.
I love you. Be careful.
Bing, I don't disagree with him at all. He just came in and gave a bunch of stats to back up what I was saying, like politically. I gave 3 examples of charts that I think prove this point, but my general argument is that there is an underlying reality there, and that you can't just discount it and say it's all about social media or about apathy or something like that.
So would the balanced view be that there's good news and bad news?
It feels like the balanced view would be that there's good news and there's bad news, but I don't know how possible it is to measure exactly what people should be feeling. I guess is hard. Yeah, I'm not sure. So for instance, like maybe things are a little bad in some regards, but like people think they're worse than they actually are, or maybe things are bad for certain sectors of people that are really bad and their opinions are appropriate. Yeah, but it's hard to say, I guess, because consumers are either dumb, or when they say things, it's hard to figure out what is actually being said sometimes. Like, for instance, I know you've seen complaints a lot about, and maybe actually somebody has a reason why I might be misunderstanding here. People complain, for instance, one of the biggest complaints about home ownership rates, right? But like, there is no part in the data that shows that home ownership rates for any particular generation, like Gen Z, or I'm sorry, not Gen Z. Yeah, Gen Z are down or aren't where they're exactly supposed to be. So even though people complain about it, say we can't afford homes, blah, 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 that doesn't seem to be the case. You are buying homes. So yeah, but it might be that maybe some people in large cities find it more unaffordable, and other people in other areas are finding it more affordable. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's hard to, yeah.
Well, one big problem that I have definitely noticed is that I think it's broadly felt that that the solution to inflation is deflation.
Wait,
like
what?
I feel like let me phrase it differently.
Go for it.
I feel like a lot of people, their definition of inflation coming down is deflation, is prices coming down.
Oh, sure.
And if it's not coming down, then they think that inflation's, like, I was on a podcast recently with the PKA guys. You've been on that podcast a few times, I think.
Yep.
But I was making the case that wages have been outpacing inflation. Inflation's been coming down for over a year now. And one of the hosts just flat out just refused to take me at my word. He was like, "That's absolutely not true. Inflation keeps going up." And I had to explain to him, like, do you understand what the rate of inflation is? And I finally got to the bottom of it. And his expectation in this kind of a situation was that prices would come down to counteract the inflation that we've experienced over the last few years. But deflation, I'm sure you're aware, would be catastrophic. Like, if we saw prices fall across the board, that would have catastrophic implications for the rest of the economy. It would be disastrous.
Yeah, there's like I think there's a weird mental thing that happens there, where even if deflation might actually be okay or whatever, just the way that consumers engage with the market and employees engage with wages and everything, it would be disastrous. That like people aren't fully rational when it comes to that or something. That like having a slightly inflationary economy is good. Also, what you said too is a lot of people don't intuitively, I guess unless you've taken a lot of math, or not a lot, I don't know how much is Calc 1. A lot of people don't intuitively grasp a rate of change, right? People assume that the first derivative, or your derivative, that like if the rate of change is negative, then the derived function must also be decreasing. So if my rate of change goes down, then that means that my actual data is negative, but that's not true. You can decrease the rate of inflation while inflation still continues to rise. Just because the rate of the change is negative doesn't mean that the actual function is negative, and that's a good thing, but people don't intuitively understand that. They're like, hold on, inflation last year was 5%. This year it's 4%, and next year it's going to be 2%. Inflation hasn't gone down. It's still 2%. It's like, well,
Yes.
yeah, exactly. That's really hard. That's a really hard thing to intuitively grasp, I think, without having like at least a basic understanding of calc or talking somebody through it a lot. I think it's not intuitive, yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, this is something that's sort of generally felt. I feel like a lot of people in this country have that kind of expectation. And if prices don't come down, then that means our economy's doing poorly. Like that, never mind the impact on their day-to-day lives or their budgets or whatever. Like if the price itself doesn't come down, then they think that our economy is still like, quote unquote, in trouble or something. That's just what I've observed. I have no idea how to quantify how many people feel that way, but I think it's a lot.
Yeah.
Like a lot. Yeah.
So it feels like, to just simplify it like really massively, like super oversimplified, if you're just to have a talking point, it's like if you have large spikes in inflation, you can fix the economy, but that's like going to be a trickle effect, right? Like it's going to take times of people like getting raises and getting their wages back up. It's never going to recover immediately. There is no recovery immediately. After a big spike in inflation, it's just going to be some time period. So even if all the right decisions have been made, it's going to look bad and maybe feel bad for a little bit of time.
Yeah, this is another thing that I have a really hard time with that I really don't like is I think people emotionally and everything in every part of the sense, they love unhealthy, runaway, overheated, massively fucked economies. Like it's addicting. Like 25% growth year into year after Trump with massive deficit spending, huge tax cuts. That feels good. You can buy a lot of shit. You have like your spending power is up. Like you're making more money. Like that feels really good, even if it's super unhealthy. It feels really annoying because you can do the equivalent of like giving somebody heroin as econ policy and them saying it's good. And then when they have like the crash afterwards of the withdrawals, they're like, God, this sucks. And it's like they're thanking the guy giving them the heroin needle and they're blaming the guy that's like putting them on the withdrawal drugs. And it's like, bro, like Trump should not have been deficit spending in his economy, at least not up until COVID. There was no excuse for that. There was no reason for that. If you were ever going to cut or have interest rates, start to rise, or any of this shit, it needed to happen under Trump. And it's kind of bullshit that that he let that economy run away so much. And now, obviously, the next, again, repeating this happened under Bush and Obama. Now we've got a Democratic president that has to come in and like clean up the mess of like the bullshit runaway economy that the last Republican got to preside over in an irresponsible manner, I think.
Who has more of an impact on economies, the Fed or the president?
The Fed, absolutely. Oh, shit. That's like a philosophical argument. I mean, I would say, like, obviously the Fed does with interest rates, but like, if the president were to come out and say some shit like, we're gonna fucking nuke China tomorrow, like, that would cause worldwide chaos. So, like, yeah. I mean, arguably, the president could have wider effects, but like, the Federal Reserve, in terms of like policy and everything, for sure has a wider impact. Absolutely, yeah.
How much, how much do presidents actually get? I know that the public credits them or faults them for a good or a bad economy, but what is their reality? Like, how much of a role did Obama play, for example, in getting us out of the Great Recession and back to sort of like normal levels or to a thriving economy? And same question for Trump.
I mean, like I mean, like the question is going to be like, it's kind of complicated because it's like, well, what role did Obama have in getting us out? Well, Obama on his own did nothing. He's just the president. But you can argue that the president of the United States can cheerlead or advocate for legislation that will help move us out of a recession. And then it's quite like, do you give them credit for that? So for instance, like, did Bush do anything to help us after 2007? I was like, well, I don't know. Does Bush get credit for TARP? Because TARP was legislation that was passed by Congress, but Bush also kind of pushed for that. So does Bush get credit for that, or does Congress get credit for that? The president didn't do it. It was legislation, but he pushed for it, right? So I don't know, like, where does the credit lie there? It depends, you know?
In the case of Trump, like, how do we credit him with anything? I feel like he did not have a hands-on.
No, Trump didn't cheerlead anything positive at all. He's a fucking loser.
He definitely cheerleaded legislation, but I'm saying, like, I feel like Biden at this White House, this administration has taken a very active role in negotiations with Congress when it came to specific pieces of legislation.
Yeah.
And it felt like Trump was just waiting for Congress to deliver a bill.
Yeah.
And like, it felt like he didn't really like move the needle one way or the other.
Yeah. This might be Trump derangement syndrome, and if somebody can point out where I'm incorrect, that's fine. I know that Trump pushed for the tax cuts. That was something that you could give him credit for if you wanted to. But like, other than that, I don't know. Was Trump proactive in running to Congress saying, we need this legislation passed, we need to get this done? I don't know if he was. Like, I know they tried to repeal and replace Obamacare. That they didn't get the replacement there. I know he wanted an infrastructure bill, but like, was Trump ever actually involved in any of the wheeling and dealing to get any of this passed? I don't think so.
Well, the administration was certainly personally involved with the repeal attempt, because I remember Vice President Pence being on the floor of the Senate, like trying to negotiate with McCain that night when they were like, I remember staying up until like 2 a.m, like waiting for that vote. It was crazy, but he was like on the floor. So, but I mean, like, I'm saying, like, how much of a role did the Trump administration have in actually crafting the policy? Like this point and this point and this point and this point, like, I didn't see any of that, especially with like the COVID stimulus stuff. It felt like all of that just came from Congress, and then he was just.
You can give Trump maybe credit for the warp speed thing.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, that was good, and then like another thing you can credit Trump for is
Abraham Accords.
I don't know much about that, but then getting NATO allies to spend more on defense was kind of like, you could argue, a good thing.
I guess, yeah.
But
his rhetoric was really dog shit around it. But if they started chiming in more money, I guess, or chipping in more money, it's okay. But yeah.
Yeah, he bullied them for sure. But I mean, it did.
Well, it wasn't that I said he bullied them. I said he's
results.
fucking retarded. He doesn't know what NATO does. that was the issue. But I mean, if they got more money, that was fine. It worked. But yeah.
How much of the sort of like the hellfire and brimstone takes of a second Trump term do you like? A lot of the rhetoric has been like, he's gonna do the Project 2025 and hollow out the administrative state, and then just replace all these federal workers with sycophants and yes men, and I've heard that he wants to just completely withdraw from NATO during his second term. I mean, like I feel like our institutions held up under a first Trump presidency, so I'd like to hope that they would hold up again, and it wouldn't literally mean the end of democracy. But like, what sort of concerns do you guys have about a second Trump presidency? Like, how much do you think is there in terms of the worrying?
I mean, I think, like I said, like I've been kind of off on both these. I think Biden's presidency was way better than I could have ever imagined. And I think most people agree with that. I think Trump's presidency was probably way worse than most people imagined. Like, I thought coming in, like, oh God, it's Trump, blah, 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 blah. But I was like, it's probably going to be business as usual, whatever. The shit that happened under Trump was unbelievable. All the wild statements publicly, pulling us out of the Iranian nuclear deal, moving the fucking embassy to Jerusalem. Why? Like, basically every single foreign policy decision was like questionable at best. Kicking the can down the road with the Doha agreements with the Taliban in Afghanistan. The abandoning our Kurdish allies to go get fucking massacred by the Turks. Like, at every step of the way, the photo ops in North Korea, yeah, that's foreign policy. Domestically, I mean, in terms of like attacks to our democracy, I think fundamentally we're really scary. I don't think we've ever had a president try to undermine our electoral process as much as Trump ever has. The phone calls to Georgia, the classified information mishandling, the constant shuffling of like his cabinet members and the attorney general, and like firing Comey, and like just everything. Like, it was so much crazy shit. Like, it got to the point where like, you couldn't even bring it up because people like, oh, you're obsessed, Trump derangement syndrome. Yeah,
dude,
I don't know.
Jeff Sessions is one of the most tragic political figures in. I feel
when he got his month or two.
In American history.
And Trump was just shitting on him the whole time.
Bro, he was the first U.S. senator to endorse Trump. Like, he was ride or die day one. And because his legal counsel from the DOJ advised him, like, you need to recuse yourself and appoint, I don't know if they told him to appoint a special counsel. That came from Rod Rosenstein. Sure. But his own White House legal counsel told him, you need to recuse yourself from this. And so he did. And then from that day forward, he was...
Enemy number one. Trump was just tweeting constantly. Yeah, Jesus.
Just constantly shit on him. And he ran for that seat in, where was he from? Alabama, I think. He ran for that same seat again and just got crushed. And now, like, nobody talks about him. But truly, it's like either him or Pence. They're two of the most tragic political figures in modern American history, I think.
Yeah. I also think, I don't think there's enough coverage about this. I don't think people talk about this enough, okay? However, I think that the, not the Dominican, what were the names? The Dominion voting machine story, I think that's actually a really big deal. You have what is essentially the largest, not essentially, I'm sorry, but what is the largest media company in the United States is more or less on record as having explicitly lied to the American public to mislead them about the integrity of the election to maintain like an allegiance with the sitting US president. That's fucking insane. That's like, there are so many parts. Here's the thing that drives me the craziest, okay? And maybe I'm wrong for thinking about it this way, but there are so many individual parts about the Donald Trump story that if any of them had applied to a Democrat, I think Republicans would have taken up arms. Do you remember how obsessed Republicans were with like Hillary Clinton's daughters? Or do you remember? Or do you know how obsessed today conservatives are about fucking Hunter Biden? Can you imagine if Joe Biden had a fucking son-in-law or stepson or whatever that was doing foreign policy on his behalf for the United States, and then after getting out of office was signing $2 billion deals with people in the Middle East? Like, bro, Republicans would actually march on the Capitol with guns this time, more of them than just 5%, right? It would be over. It would get, and we could go through like 50. Do you remember Uranium One with Hillary Clinton, where Republicans were claiming that Hillary unilaterally sold our entire uranium? It's like, yeah. There are so many individual things that Trump did that if any Democrat did it, Republicans would be marching with AR-15s. I can't. I can't. Oh my God.
They're so good at keeping narratives alive. Like, so the big one that I've noticed that has endured for fucking 5 years now and I'm sure some people in your chat, if you're like Trump, if they're Trump fans, they'll probably think like that this is true, but when Biden went to Ukraine and pressured them to fire the Shokin prosecutor guy, that the IMF wanted fired, that the EU wanted fired, that the State Department wanted fired, that members of Congress wanted fired, that was hashed out in the first impeachment trial. It's just been so thoroughly debunked, this idea that he went there to personally lobby them to fire this prosecutor because they were supposedly investigating his son, which there's no evidence of that being the case whatsoever. That has been debunked 10,000 times from 10,000 different angles, and they're still hanging on to that.
But the funny thing is, their justification for that is literally that one fucking clip of, by the way, Biden speaking publicly in front of an office saying like, oh, well, I told them I was going to withhold the money and blah, 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 which was, by the way, part of the condition of like the treaty that had been signed or the agreement that had been signed, that money would be released to Ukraine to spend as long as they were doing the appropriate steps to blah, blah, and be like, look, that's Biden. But if you show them a billion different Trump quotes, like, well, Trump didn't mean that. Well, when he called Georgia on that private line and had all this, well, he wasn't really asking for that. Like, you're supposed to, it's not what he says, it's what he means. And like, well, when Trump said that like he knew it was secret and he should have declassified it, he was just like, he was just kind of like using a turn of phrase. And it's like, bro, are you serious? Like, you really want me to treat Trump like a low functioning autistic child in every single statement that he makes? Meanwhile, you are combing through with the like most precise magnifying glass on earth with every single statement. The other part is like, unbelievable.
I mean, just like in the case of the prosecutor, the most easy way to debunk it is just all you got to do is just point to the fact that the IMF wanted him gone and the EU wanted him gone. So were they in on this conspiracy as well?
Well, like why wasn't the whole world? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm just saying, like, were they in on the experience on the conspiracy as well, or did it just line up 1-to-1 at the same time?
Yeah.
Like it served Biden's interest and the EU's interest at the same time. You would have to believe one of those things. It's so nonsensical, but they have just gotten so good. I'm talking about the right-wing sort of like media apparatus, like social media and regular media.
I think it's a good question.
Hammering these things.
Yeah, these same point. They did it to Hillary Clinton for fucking 20 years or whatever. Yeah. I think that it's a really good question. People say like, what about that Biden quote about the, and like the question is, why didn't literally a single person on the entire planet give a fuck when Biden made these comments at the time? Do you ever stop and wonder that? Like, why did nobody care back then? He said it publicly on TV. We all heard it. Why did nobody give a fuck back then? Yeah, it's so dumb.
You would have to have a sort of cartoonishly evil caricature of Biden in your mind as like that's who he is, to think that he would get in front of cameras and brag about like a nakedly corrupt act like that.
Yeah, like, but I mean, these people think they do it, right? Because how many times did they quote that stupid fucking op-ed that was written as part of like an IMF conference or whatever, where they're like, oh, you'll own nothing and be happy. And it's just like an op-ed of like, here's some potential futures and goods and bads. And people are like, this was the fucking plan. That's the fucking plan all along. Blah, 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 blah. And it's like, yeah, remember how many of these great plans never happened? Do you remember how there was supposed to be the great, what do they call it after COVID? It was going to be the whole
Great Reset.
Yeah, we remember the Great Reset. Where did that go? Remember all the people dying from the COVID vaccines? Where did that happen at? Remember people saying they were going to be permanent? Oh yeah, well they don't hold on as much anymore. Where are all the permanent vaccine passports? I thought that was going to be a thing. What was the statement about Canada permanently taking everybody's freedoms away? Like they've given you more freedom. Now you can kill yourself without a hospital. Right? Where are these things that were supposed to happen? None of them happened, and they don't get held accountable for any of it. Where are these people? It's like, bro, you've made all these crazy outlandish predictions, and none of them came true. What the fuck? Why aren't you held accountable for that? Sorry.
Even in California, I think you didn't leave California until well after this happened, but even in California, they weren't asking for anybody's fucking vaccine card after like 3 months. Like 90% of places that I went. And I think that you were technically even supposed to, like whenever you went to an event or a restaurant or a theater, they were checking people's vaccine cards like in the very beginning, and that lasted literally like 2-3 months. And then after that, everything was basically back to normal.
Yeah.
Like most people weren't wearing masks. They weren't asking for any kind of like proof that you got vaccinated.
But remember, how many times did you hear, bro, dude, the Patriot Act in Iraq like rotted people's minds? How many times did you hear like, remember the Patriot Act? Every time the government does it, they steal more freedoms. Do you think vaccine passports aren't here to stay? Well, you're an idiot. I'm here to tell you it's going to get even worse. They're going to have passports for all your vaccines. Oh, international travel? That's a thing of the past. You're going to need blah, 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 blah. I was like, oh, well, crazy that literally none of that happened to be true. But yeah.
Speaking of the Patriot Act, Second Thought made the case that United States is basically as authoritarian as China, if not more. And the thing that he pointed to counter the idea that, like, I mean, obviously in China, their surveillance systems are ubiquitous and incredibly sophisticated and just like everywhere. And his point, the way that he made his point was the Patriot Act. Like, because we passed the Patriot Act, that means that we're basically just as bad as China when it comes to surveilling.
Yep. it's the same.
Even with the Patriot Act, don't you need to get a warrant still with the Patriot Act? Or like, what exactly did they do with that?
I think it's a different process. Is the Patriot Act where FISA courts came from?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, so there's like a different...
So.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. FISA was 78, is a different thing. I'm trying to remember what the Patriot Act expanded. I know the Patriot Act, I think, gave more powers to intelligence agencies for domestic surveillance. I don't remember exactly what it expanded there. But yeah, but like this is the Iraq thing. It's the same thing where it's like everybody will always point to the Patriot Act as an example of like, oh, you don't think the United States isn't going to force castration on your child? What about the Patriot Act, right? Or like you can go to the Middle East and it's like, oh, wow, there's a group of 100 people that have like murdered 7 billion citizens. What are you going to do? Well, we should intervene. Huh, like you did in Iraq. Like that's always like people's brains are stuck in like 2003 or whatever, and it's like we're never leaving.
They go back further. They go back further to like the 70s with like.
Oh no, that's lefties. That's tankies. Those are fucking yeah. I'm just saying for the broader people. Yeah, like people are like Iraq poisoned, mind poisoned. Like Iraq and the Patriot are like the defining foreign policy and domestic policy points in everybody's brain, and that is literally what the last bill that was passed in the U.S. was the Patriot Act, and then like the last foreign policy thing we did was the Iraq War, and that's everything. Yeah.
Yeah. It's wild because like if you talk about how like Hamas is bad or whatever, like and you point to something like some awful thing that some execution or something like that, oftentimes with like the lefty types on social media, they'll go back to like the fucking Tuskegee Airmen, and like the syphilis experiments from like the 50s. Or they'll go back to the 70s with like murdering Fred Hampton. It's like, bro, you had to go back 50 years to try to get a dunk. Like, this is incredible. Yeah. Anyways. I'm gonna get back to playing COD, but I'm a big supporter of what you're doing. I think that's awesome that you guys are putting a house together, and I hope you guys raise enough money that you need.
Okay, yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right, man, take it easy. Bye,
Good
chat.
luck. Have fun on COD. Be careful. Wait.
Yeah.
Did you ever play any like the COD battle royales, or are you just like a strict like multiplayer person?
I played a bit of the BRs. Yeah.
Did they stop the BR stuff? Or are they still doing them, or? No,
they're still doing it. The new one comes out on the 6th. And it's a new map, and they're making some big changes with like the gameplay. But yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, hey, I love you. It's been fun. Be careful. Okay.
Yeah. Take it easy.
Wait. Oh my God.
Oh, yep. Oh Jesus. Yep.
We're gonna fight. We're gonna fight for a minute. Okay.
Okay. What's up? Oh, is this about Oppenheimer, bro?
Yeah. Have we talked about this yet?
Yeah.
Oh shit. Okay.
You're so wrong, dude. I bought it when it came out on digital demand. I watched it 3 nights in a row, and I almost like snidely tweeted at you. But you're so fucking wrong about that movie.
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna rewatch it. I will rewatch it. I will rewatch it, and I'll give you an updated opinion. Maybe I just wasn't in the zone when I watched it before. I will rewatch it. Okay. I'll do it. Something
that stuck with me though is when you asked like what the climax of the film was, and I've been thinking about that since you asked the question. You don't need like. Not every film needs like in the last literal like 10-15 minutes or whatever something explosive.
Yeah, I've heard this one before. It's like when a woman is like, "Oh, I don't actually care if I orgasm during sex." Ha ha ha. Yeah, bullshit. Okay, listen. When I talk about
what about any Scorsese film besides like The Departed? Like Scorsese takes like fucking 45 minutes or an hour to like land his plane. Like, did you see the Irishman?
I did not. I don't watch
it's fucking
digitally.
3.5 hours.
Okay?
It's 3.5 hours, and the last 45 minutes is just like, It's not climactic whatsoever. I'm just saying, like, with a lot of movies, you can sort of like slowly wind your movie down. It doesn't need to be just fucking explosive at the end.
Okay, sure. I don't necessarily disagree. I'm sorry. When I bring up that what is the climax point, my point isn't to say like what was like the big exciting thing. My point was that I felt like the movie was trying to orient itself around two completely different topics that didn't overlap well, in my opinion, for a satisfying A side, B side story. That was my issue. That like the whole thing about his, we're not gonna do it, but like the whole thing about
security
his like
clearance.
losing his security clearance, and then the whole thing about building the bomb. I feel like these two plots didn't play off of each other well, and that jerking back and forth between one and the other was just unsatisfying, and that like the whole conclusion of the way both these wrapped up just felt lame. That was my feeling.
I felt like, okay, so listen,
ahead.
I
Yeah.
felt like the point of the movie, it was sort of two-pronged, but I felt like the overarching point of the movie was the cost of actually developing this technology. The personal cost to Oppenheimer and the cost to the world, and sort of like the horror that it wrought at the time.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
But then that gets into a totally different conversation. Like, do you think World War III would have happened if we didn't have nukes?
Oh shit! I've actually had a really interesting thought about this like a few weeks ago. I think, would World War III have happened if we didn't have nukes? Here's something that I think. Okay, I don't know if this is a hot take. Fuck, somebody else has probably had this take already, but I'm gonna claim it as my own if nobody has. Okay, I think that nuking Japan during World War II was probably one of the best things that could have happened for the future of the world, because if nukes hadn't been deployed at that point, they would have been deployed at some point, and the idea that they were deployed as soon as they were developed, so we were literally limited on our nuclear arsenal, was probably way better than like 20 years later, the US and the Soviet Union having a nuclear conflict, and we're launching like 30 or 40 or 50 or more nukes at each other. I think that like the stigma that was created with nuclear weapons in World War II was probably really important for the future health of the world, and everybody kind of being a little bit afraid of nukes, you know?
I went from being like a super college lefty that was just completely morally opposed to dropping the bomb for a really long time, and then like I've thought about it differently in recent years, even before the film came out. But it's like you don't want to be like, I don't want to celebrate something like hundreds of thousands of people dying.
Of course, yeah.
But I definitely have a way more nuanced view of dropping those bombs, and I tend to take the view that we probably would have seen much more large-scale conflict on this planet if the nukes had never been developed. And like in the argument for the United States to develop the bomb, that is just such a easy argument to make, and they made it in the movie in just one line, and it was just like, if we don't make this bomb, the Nazis will, and that's all you need to say. Like, that's 100% the perfect justification for developing that technology. But
Sure.
Oh, what I wanted to say was fuck, I forgot.
You agreed with me about Oppenheimer. It's okay. That's what you were gonna say.
Dude, I think it's legit. I think it's my favorite movie this year. I thought Across the Spider-Verse was #1, but Oppenheimer's taking that spot. I thought it was so good. I thought it was Nolan's best film. I could not disagree with you more. Oh, okay. So you made the point, I think, when you were talking shit about that movie, I think one time you talked about how like losing security clearance, you didn't understand why that would be a bad thing. And I feel like you just weren't paying attention when you watched the movie, because they definitely explain that.
Okay, I can go back and rewatch it, but I feel like, to be clear, when I say I don't know why that's a bad thing, I'm not saying that I don't know actually why it's a bad thing. What I'm saying is I feel like they didn't sell it in the movie enough to make me care about it in the movie. But maybe they did. There was a part and I missed it or whatever, but I just didn't feel that like...
Well, they definitely in the movie explain like this would ruin his reputation and basically blacklist him from academia, and everything that he had built his career off of would crumble by being denied security clearance.
Yeah, I understand that. I understand what you're saying there. Yeah, because there was a line, I think, about that. But we're getting deep into film critique. The issue that I would have, I'm trying to think if I can think of like a better example of this. Fuck. There's got to be an example in a film where I can think of this. When you talk about like would ruin his career or ruin his academia and blah, 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 I don't feel like I ever saw enough of him in academia or that to care. Like, let's say, for instance, like the first like 5 or 15 minutes of the movie was like him teaching, and then by the end they're like, if you lose this, you can never teach again. And like the final scene is him like walking by like a classroom and like missing teaching or some dumb shit like that, right? That would be an arc where it's like, oh shit, this is a thing he really likes, and then now he's lost it because of the security clearance, like, oh god, and it's like a sad resolution. In terms of him like losing his position in academia and all that, none of that is sold in the movie, that he's like, he loves academia and all of this. It's all like down to business. It's all super like, oh, like he we gotta fucking develop the bomb, blah, 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 blah. In fact, the opening scenes were even how much he hated like part of the academia that he was involved in because he sucked in doing lab work or whatever, right? That's like
it's not just academia though. It would have ruined his ability. Like he was giving public speeches. Like that was, I think, how he made his money for a little bit was these paid speeches. He would go around the country, and some of the speeches that he was giving, you needed to have security clearance for because it was like for an audience that was, they were trying to determine like what do we do about this technology moving forward. All of that would have stopped. Like he would have been blacklisted from academia and sort of like the public sector in terms of like government stuff.
Yeah, I guess, but like again, who cares? I mean, like,
what do you mean? Who cares? You're talking about destroying. It would have destroyed his life. I mean, maybe they could have illustrated that a little bit better.
Yeah,
but
I just don't see where it like who cares? He made a couple speeches. They like dramatized the fuck out of it. He was at some socialist shit, but like, I don't know. Like, I just don't see like where are all of these huge things that he can't participate in, or it's like I don't know. I just feel like it didn't sell it well in the movie. But hey, I'll rewatch it and maybe I'm wrong. Okay, maybe I'm totally wrong. Maybe I'm completely fucking off. All right.
Well, you have your ADD meds now, so you can sit through a 3-hour movie, right?
I mean, yeah, but I feel like this movie, I hate this argument because Oppenheimer, okay, no offense, you brought up Scorsese. Oppenheimer is literally made for people with ADHD, okay? This is not a movie that requires patience or appreciation of like cinema to sit and watch. It is the most like aggressively fucking paced movie I have ever seen in my life. It's like scene, song, edgy statement, cut, scene. No, like that's like the whole movie is like, oh, he's got a kid. He's 4 years old. He abandons him. Oh, next scene, he's 6 years old. Like, holy shit. Like that movie is so aggressively paced. The idea that you have to have some level of patience to sit and watch it is absolutely not true. There are movies where you need some patience. Oppenheimer is absolutely not one of them. But
you definitely need patience for Scorsese. But I was gonna say Dunkirk is way more aggressively paced than Oppenheimer, and so is Mad Max Fury Road.
No, hold on. Mad Max Fury Road? Wait. Mad Max Fury Road, yes. Dunkirk is more aggressively paced than Oppenheimer?
Dunkirk is fucking relentless, my friend. It opens like with this tense moment where he's running through the streets trying to get away from these people that are shooting him, and then it just jumps right the fuck in. I think it's his shortest movie ever, because if it would have been longer, I would have had a fucking heart attack. You should go back and watch that movie again, because it is, some people in your chat are saying it's a snoozer. What the fuck is wrong? Dunkirk is a snoozer? How could you possibly hold that view?
I don't think it's a snoozer, but aggressively paced. I don't know. Okay. Well, I'm going to review. I'm going to review these things.
Even the music, even the fucking music. There's this constant like going on the whole fucking time. Anyways, yeah. All right. Yeah. I'm going to go play COD. Enjoy your weekend.
Okay. I love you. Be careful. Okay. Stay safe.
Take it easy.
Bye. Okay. Should we believe Americans when they say the economy is bad? Okay. We paid $600 for this article. Let's read it. Finally. This is from 5 days ago. Okay. Something weird is happening in America. GDP growth for quarter 3 was just revised up from an already scorching 4.9% to 5.2%. More Americans have jobs than at any time in history, but the public is up in arms about economic conditions, with consumer confidence dropping to a 6-month low. There really is no pleasing some people. With headline indicators in such rude health, we would expect the number of Americans who think they're better off than this time last year to outnumber those who say they're worse off by about 25 percentage points. Instead, the reportedly worse off outnumbers the better offs by 10 points in the latest University of Michigan's Index of Current Economic Conditions. Wow, Freedom Jesus, thanks for your tier 4 sub. Wow, Jay Maidens, thanks for subbing. I know what you're thinking. Inflation explains all of this. People really hate rising prices and are reminded that every time they buy something, inflation salience drowns out other more distant or intangible gains. It's certainly a good theory, but countries all around the world have faced steep inflation, many steeper than the US. Presumably their consumers are also much more pessimistic than we would expect. Well, no, actually. Extending an original analysis by X-user Quantian1, I've calculated expector consumer sentiment for a set of countries based on their underlying economic indicators and compared it to actual sentiment. Relative to the eve of the pandemic, U.S. consumers now appear gloomier than the French, the Germans, and even the British. The Europeans all feel about as confident as one might expect based on how their economies are performing. Disproportionate doom seems to be a new American affliction. Since it's Sunday and I'm bored, I figured I would finally definitively answer the question of why do people think the economic is bad? Is that a real phrase? And is that the case? This is because it is easy to answer, and the answer is funny and will make many people mad. Oh, well, what is this guy's analysis? First of all, we will ignore everyone on Twitter and look at objective data. In this case, the University of Michigan's consumer survey asking what people think economic conditions are. Spoiler, people think the economy is very bad, worse than any other time other than 1980 and 2008. Okay, now let's think of all the variables that might cause them to think that and build a model. I picked the following. We've got inflation rate change, unemployment change, housing prices, real wages, dollar strength, interest rates, stock prices, and went from there. Now let's build a simple linear model to predict confidence from those 9 variables, but only fit it from 78 to 2019, excluding COVID. The R-squared is very good, 87%, and the p-value is essentially 0. So consumer vibes can almost be perfectly explained by objective data. Great. The results line up with what you'd expect with a few surprises. People really want low levels of inflation, low unemployment, rising asset prices, high interest rates, etc. 2 surprises, there's a slight preference for rising inflation, and real wages don't matter at all. Now let's extend that chart above to include COVID. Same model as above. Oops, now it's wildly wrong. Consumers should think the economy is really good, 105-ish, if they cared about the same things they did from 1979 to 2019, which they don't. Economists hate inconsistency. So let's re-estimate the model then and figure out what changed. The answer is that 3 major things changed. Consumers care a lot less about unemployment than they did. They prefer housing prices to fall rather than rise now, and more than anything else, they hate high interest rates. This third effect completely dominates everything else and explains 104% of the 29-point gap between the model and current levels. The other effects largely offset each other, but that is one of the huge outliers. So the clear-cut, data-backed, but for reason why Biden is unpopular is because Jerome Powell is making people's mortgage rates go up, and they're not happy about it. This may surprise you, but it really shouldn't. Americans love borrowing money, and they hate being told they can't. You could probably tell a story about how America is now a deeply levered shitco that doesn't care about income as long as change in net cash stays positive. But like 500,000 people have done that already, and I need to get back to work and pay off my credit cards now. The end. 2 postscripts. Some people say that wildly diverging after the fitting period means it's overfit. It's not. You can train on much smaller portions, about 12% of the pre-2020 data, and get the same finite divergence. There is a structural break in 2020. Number 2, other people make the better complaint that multicollinearity in the data, if you lasso the variables instead of using OLS, you can see very similar results. Housing flips negative, inflation becomes more salient, unemployment less salient, rate hikes hugely salient. Somebody did a similar analysis with his own preferred set of variables and reached a similar conclusion that housing prices and mortgage spreads are major drivers, with the CPI and unemployment salience flipped as well. Huh. Okay, that's his feeling. Hold on. Boom, boom. Okay. Okay, so he's borrowing from this. So what's going on? Last weekend, Focal Data ran a poll for me asking a representative sample of 2,000 U.S. adults whether they thought economic circumstances had improved or deteriorated over recent years. The results were startling. Americans are consistently wrong in the negative direction on almost every measure we polled. By huge margins, they believe inflation is still rising, it's falling, that it has outstripped wage growth, wages have outpaced prices, and that they've become less wealthy, they've become much wealthier. Attempts to justify this sense of gloom often emphasize the challenges faced by less prosperous groups, but this also goes counter to the evidence. One explanation I heard is that the despondency comes from young people struggling with runaway rents, but wages have risen faster for them than the old, outpacing rents, plus young consumers are the most positive per the Michigan survey. Similarly, wages have risen faster for those on the lowest incomes, reversing more than a third of the increase in wage inequality over the past 4 decades. Wealth has risen for the least and most wealthy alike. The most striking response from our survey concerned the sense of longer-term progress. Large majorities of Americans think the median income today pays for a worse lifestyle than 30 years ago. He's got a link here saying demonstrably false. I don't know what all that takes into account. And that poverty is higher than it was a generation ago. It has plummeted. One particularly revealing statistic is that Americans' assessments of their own financial situation has barely budged over the past 5 years, but their rating of the national economy has worsened steeply. It seems that they've decided that the vibes are bad, so things must be going badly for mostly other people, even if not for themselves. Political affiliation is also key to understanding how economic sentiments are separating from economic reality in the U.S. One question from the Michigan survey asks whether people think now is a good time to buy big household items. When the pandemic hit, Democrats and Republicans alike moved sharply towards not a good time to buy. But just months later, when Joe Biden won the presidential election, while COVID-19 still raged, Democrats suddenly declared conditions ripe for purchases of new fridge freezers, and Republicans did not. Interesting. It seems that U.S. consumer sentiment is becoming the latest victim of expressive responding, where people give incorrect answers to questions to signal wider tribal, political, or social affiliations. My advice, if you want to know what Americans really think of economic conditions, look at their spending patterns. Unlike cautious Europeans, U.S. consumers are back on the pre-pandemic trending and buying more stuff than ever. Interesting. Okay. Here's our FT article on this. Okay. Oh my God. 3 more posts. And then 1 more video. Oh my God, we're doing it. We're gonna do it, okay? Is there a reason to rent an apartment over buying a house if you can afford the price of a house? Yes, there's a lot of costs baked into home ownership that could make buying a house more expensive than renting an apartment. It just depends on how long you're gonna stay in a particular area. That's probably the most important variable. There's other variables to take into account too, but